driving along till I got the rainbow right behind us. Okay.
Yeah, Cassius is going to be on the back of the plane with a flying home. Oh, yeah. There are going to be a few requests, are there? Balloon for balloon.
Just got to eat 2 dozen starfish.
I keep worrying.
He's a good musician, Martin. Yeah, I know him quite well.
I was born at Castle Crag.
Oh, right. Oh, where's that?
Oh, right.
Water carries
It's not bad.
I put him up at my uncle's place and playing on the bed and then want to stop the reason.
No, just so
Pornography in the hills is basically an hour's and half of the panties. Someone else on the
I think so.
Well, I'll laugh at it just gets up to that part. Oh, yeah, Oh, real shite in their old cars and cars and places. I'd expect done them at that time, in the 60s.
Stop putting someone else's place. It still sounds as good.
And Millicent Russell reopened Jimbour and celebrated that reopening with a function attended by nearly 1,200 people. Jimbour had lain empty since the 13th of July 1912. On that day, an auction had taken place at which, in the words of the advertisement placed by the auctioneers, the whole of the furniture and appointments contained in 22 rooms at Jimbour House and comprising tables, chairs, bedroom suites, bookcases, card tables, drawing room suites, office costly and antique ornaments, clocks, vases, china and glassware, lamps, a piano and hundreds of articles, too numerous to particularise, had been sold. The advertisement continued. Jimbour House was furnished by the late Sir Joshua Peter Bell, regardless of cost, and the instructions are to sell every lot, particularly without reserve. The sale finished. It had taken all day. The contents were taken away, and Jimbour lay sleeping, empty and abandoned. A house, even of slate and stone, does not long endure without constant care. The state of Jimbour's dereliction is best shown by the fact that the potential buyer preceding Wilfred Adams Russell thought that what was left of the house he might use as a sandstone quarry with the assistance of a stick of dynamite. The story of Jimbour, then, is the story of its creation and its restoration and the life of those who lived here on the station and in the community, both local and at state and national level. The first part of that story is the story of the station itself. Jimbour's first manager was Henry Dennis, who took up the squatting run for Richard Scougal in 1840. The current manager, Carl Graham, has held that position since 1992, succeeding his father Don, who held it for 20 years. Carl is ideally placed to speak about your Jimbour's agricultural history and its future. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carl Graham.
Thank you, Chairman Andrews. That accent will take a bit of following, I can tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege tonight to welcome you all here on such a beautiful evening. We're very, very, very lucky. We didn't think we were going to get away with it. But before I do that, I thought I might, if I may, just give you all a very brief overview on what we do here at Jimbour and what we plan to do in the coming years. We're a little over 11,000 acres, 11,200 to be precise. We're mountain Coolabah basalt ridge country, undulating down into black soil creek flats. We are not, I don't believe we're Jimbour plain country here, we're creek flats. Our country is dissected into 3,000 acres, of which is cultivation, of which we grow cereal crops and winter forage crops for our stock. The balance of over 8,000 acres is made up of natural with some improved pastures, which run 700 odd breeders and their progeny to turn off as bullocks and cull heifers. We buy in some stock to try and turn off around 700 fat cattle annually, season permitting, of course. We sell around 30 odd commercial Charolais bulls per year and have recently resumed Jimbour Charolais state. So in a nutshell, that's what we've done here at Jimbour, but with things becoming increasingly tougher, and no secret I don't think, in the rural industry, and having an asset such as this homestead behind me here, it was decided the time was right to branch out and become part of the wine and tourism industry. With the help of a very competent management team, we are currently constructing 50 acres of vineyard, and in the near future hope to make a start on the tourism scene. We are presently looking at such things as construction of an amphitheatre just below the swimming pool behind you there, in the near future, and which will house around 5,000 guests. And the Stone House to be transformed into wine tasting and cellar door centre. That's to name a couple. For those of you who aren't aware, the Stone House was originally the store and post office before the township was moved to its present location, which is approximately 2 kilometres to the east. I suspect it was moved there because of the railway and only one creek crossing as opposed to 7. So historically the Stone House has tremendous significance to this area. We already have an advisory committee, if you like, in Colin O'Connor, John Derrick and Ross Thornton, We thank them and the Wombo Shire Council for their advice and support to date. A project such as this relies very much on dedicated and skilled people to run and maintain it. We're extremely fortunate to have such individuals here at Jimbour, and with the help and support of the community and their many talents, we believe we can be successful in the Queensland, Australian and international arenas. This house, the property, has been part of and the community has been part of my life for almost 30 years. So I guess, you know, I do tend to take it for granted. It's home to me. So it's on occasions such as this that one tends to step back a pace or two and just remind myself that it's not only a magnificent homestead and surrounds, but a very special place. And just looking at it, at our guests tonight, familiar and new faces, I don't think I'm alone in that assumption. So with that said, it is indeed an honour for me and a very great pleasure on behalf of Jimbour to welcome you all to the 75th anniversary for the reopening of Jimbour. Thank you.
It may be the very stones of Jimbour itself. It may be its outlook over the surrounding countryside, and it may be the commitment to the community that Jimbour seems to call forth from all its occupants. Whatever the source, the inhabitants of Jimbour have been drawn to the political life of the state. Rob Borbidge has been a member of the State Parliament since 1997. His ministerial responsibilities have included business and tourism. He was Premier of Queensland from 1996 to 1998 and is currently the Leader of the Opposition. Politics in Queensland are rarely dull, and the forthcoming election promises to be more than usually interesting. As one who has experienced directly the ups and downs of politics, Rob Borbidge is particularly well placed to speak to us of Jimbour's political history. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rob Borbidge.
Thank you very much, Chairman Andrew, to David and to Deb. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that taking into account the chairmanship that we're seeing from Andrew tonight, I'm sure that the political traditions of Jimbour will survive well into the future. It is a great pleasure to be here tonight and to talk briefly about the political traditions of this great Queensland landmark. We really are in distinguished company tonight. We are within the precincts of a place that is as fine an example of Australian country living as it is possible to find. We are enfolded by history, experiencing a place where the presence of the past vitalises the present. I want to note especially the presence with us tonight of Sir Walter Campbell, eminent jurist, formerly both Chief Justice and Governor of Queensland. Sir Walter is wearing two hats tonight, or probably three. He's here not only as a great jurist and former vice-regal representative, he's also here as father-in-law. He is, you might say, the senior dad present. Later, he's going to talk about legal matters in the history of Jimbour House, and for that task, he is superbly qualified. I've been invited to say something about the honoured and honourable place Jimbour House has played in Queensland's political history. Jimbour House is a landmark. It is a landmark for the Dalby district to which it, or the property it stands on, gave birth, and the vital, productive Darling Downs of which it is so much a part. As we've heard, it is a landmark for pastoral industry. It is a landmark for agricultural extension and improvement. It is a landmark for advancement. It is a landmark for community, the real community the genuine community that Australian country people are renowned for creating. The community that recognises different levels and different skills and honours them all. And that is very much the political tradition of this place. The democratic community that Australian bushmen, pastoralists, croppers, shearers, station hands, the full range of occupations that have made our rural history first created and then willed to their country and to progressive democrats everywhere. That is a proud history. It is a history that we must never forget. It is a history in Queensland where we must acknowledge the role of this special place. It is a history we must always honour. It is a history we must always be ready to fight to protect. It is an open history, open-minded and open-ended, and one about which it is impossible to feel anything but absolute and unqualified proud. It is a big-hearted history that, like Jimbour House in the gentle light of the rising and the setting sun, points the way to the path of the future. History is our touchstone and must always be. History is the story of human endeavour, of times good and bad, of great deeds and dark deeds, of triumph and of despair, of victory and defeat. But most of all, it is the story of how enterprising and visionary people, as individuals and communities, work to overcome the obstacles that they find in their way and then move to a better future. And that, in essence, is exactly how you would précis the political history of Jimbour House and the individuals who have had stewardship over it and who, as history shows us in turn, were held in thrall to it. The families who have held Jimbour in trust for their futures and its, the Bells and the Russells, have always been civic-minded, have always deeply engaged in the democratic politics of first our colony and then our state and our nation. First the Bells and then the Russells nurtured Jimbour with open hearts, as we see in the tradition of this place as the caring centre of the community in which it stands, and in parallel nurtured the governance of Queensland through an equally energetic engagement in politics. I don't doubt that these walls could tell us a tale or two about the really great moments in Queensland history. I'm sure that this house is, in its own quiet way, as grateful for its loving restoration as the people of Queensland should be and are, that this unique element of our heritage is still with us, better, brighter and more beautiful than ever. Jimbour House is deeply embedded in our political history. It was here that one of the Russells, W.A. Russell, developed the idea of standing as guarantor for the first bank account opened by the Country Party. It was here through the colonial days and later, within our federation, that the great political issues of the day were debated, with as much force of character, I'm sure, though perhaps somewhat less noise, than they were ever debated in that other magnificent icon of Queensland's architectural heritage, the big building at the end of George Street in Brisbane. This house, the 75th anniversary of whose restoration and rebuilding we're celebrating tonight, has been the home of a Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the home, the quiet place, the reflexive pool of light and inspiration of the most important member of our Parliament. It's been the home of 4 respected parliamentarians, 2 Bells and 2 Russells, and the important focus of another Russell, David, who I'm sure Sir Walter would like to tell us, but probably won't, is actually here tonight as Chief Son-in-Law, whose political energy and love for Queensland has taken him to the summit of organisational power in the National Party. I hope that I haven't strayed too far from my brief. Facts and figures and statistics are important. They're vital, for without them we do not know where we've been and therefore cannot know where we're going. But I thought that insofar as they relate to Jimbour House and politics, they're well enough known to this audience. What drives great political ideas is great men, or perhaps in these days of gender-specific prohibition, I should say great people. Great people have great ideas. Great ideas empower great communities and build great futures. And that's what I believe politics is all about, and that has been the great political tradition of this important place. That's why Jimbour House and its honour roll of residents are so vitally important to the great story of Queensland. That's why this great house and those great figures from its past throw so bright and such a wonderful light on us today. I'm sure that the great tradition of Jimbour will continue well into the future. It is part of the living history of the state of Queensland. It's part of the present, and I'm sure it will remain very much part of the future of political life in this great state of ours. Thank you.
Yeah, but I don't know whether the care is just put on for the benefit of the audience or not. Well, I propose to say a few words about the legal aspects of Jimbour House. The lighting is not very good, actually. I was assured that the lighting was to be good, and my grandson, who's the master of ceremony, said I can only take 5 minutes. He told me today. I told him I'd take much longer than that. Whether it sort of sunk into him or not, I don't know. But the lighting, the lighting here is very, very poor. I must complain about it. But now, can you improve the lighting? Yes. Oh, yeah, I can't see. Right, take the glasses off. But now, David, you're quite wrong about this. Richard Screwball was in 1842 the first pioneer owner of Jimbour Station. And although he was the owner for a while, it wasn't long before he got into financial difficulties and went bankrupt. And it's obvious, I would say, that the lawyers and the legal processes were involved at that very early stage in Jimbour Station. Now, Thomas Bell, a man called Thomas Bell, had in about 1830 migrated with his family from Ireland to Australia. And Joshua Peter Bell was his eldest son, and he was the man, of course, who built Jimbour House. And he was terribly difficult with his life, excuse me. Was any possibility of getting it fixed up? Yeah, oh, well, we'll see how good the Russells are at this. It's obvious that they don't understand when geriatrics speak. They've got to talk. They've got to have some light. It reminds me that I was talking to Archbishop Peter Hollingworth the other day, and he told me, someone had told me they made a very good speech in London when they went over to celebrate the anniversary of Federation. And he had his speech down for 20 minutes, and he was told just the day before he made the speech that he had to cut it down to 5 minutes. Well, he said that was good for him. He made a good speech. He doesn't think he's made a better speech. But I'm not like that. For example, the light is not here yet. Now, Joshua Peter, after leaving the King's School in Parramatta, had entered the office of a Sydney solicitor, and he began the study of law. Now, Thomas Bell, his father, at first had the station managed by Henry Dennis. You heard the Master of Ceremonies, my Andrew, speak about Henry Dennis. But the latter was, he was drowned, and after he was drowned in 1847, that is Dennis, Joshua Peter himself and his two sons, Alex and, Thomas Bell himself, and his two sons, Alex and Joshua Peter, managed the partnership in the name, or firm name, of Bell and Company. Are you coming with the light or not?
Dad and Bernie are racing for a torch. I'm not sure how long they'll be.
Well, let's just see how good they are. Now, Joshua Peter, he came up here in 1847, Joshua Peter Bell, when he was 21 years of age. And his father, Thomas, and his brother, Alec, as I say, managed the place for a while, but it wasn't long before Joshua Peter himself had the, what is that, a microphone or a torch? Was it? That's excellent. Strange enough, for the first time now I can read. Don't ask me where I am.
He's a Jimbour.
Now, but it wasn't long after Joshua Peter's management of it that it had the reputation of being one of the best conducted stations on the Darling Downs. And I've researched such Queensland records as I've been able to locate, and I can find no evidence to the effect that Joshua Peter was ever admitted to the legal profession as a solicitor or a barrister. Where am I? No time, please. It appears that he did not complete his legal studies, and records of the Queensland Club, of which club he was later the president, show that when he was admitted to membership of the club in 1866, his occupation was shown as grazier. Joshua Peter held the seat of Northern Downs from 1862 until he became a member of and was elected President of the Legislative Council in 1879. And for most of the year 1880, he was the Administrator of Queensland in the absence on leave of Governor Kennedy. In 1881, shortly before his death, he was created KCMG. And when Joshua Peter's eldest son, Joshua Thomas, known as Joey Bell, and I may refer to him from time to time in that capacity in order to save some distinction between the Bells, was educated, was born in 1863 and was educated at Brisbane Grammar. And from 1881 to 1885, he attended Trinity Hall at Cambridge University and was called to the English bar at the Inner Temple in London. I'm unable to say whether or not he practiced at the bar in England, but in 1888 he was appointed as Marshal to a High Court judge on the Northern Circuit. And that's a position, I suppose, roughly akin to that of associate to a judge in the Queensland context. He returned to Australia, Joshua Peter did, Joshua Thomas in Joey. He returned to Australia in 1889, and he became a director of the Darling Downs and the Western Land Company, to which I shall refer later, and was admitted to the bar in Queensland in August of that year. His chambers were in what was then known as Celtic chambers, and as a student it was in Adelaide Street, and as a student of law, just after World War II, I attended many lectures in Celtic, what was then known as Celtic chambers. From 1890 to 1892, he was private secretary to Sir Samuel Griffiths. So I suppose that in those early years, his practice at the Queensland Bar was not a large one. However, it's known that in later years, he represented the government in several important land court cases. As you no doubt know, he became the member for Dalby in the Legislative Assembly in 1893 and held that Dalby seat until his death in 1911 at the age of 47. In 1881, the Bell family had fallen into financial difficulties, and in 1884, the Queensland National Bank took over Jimbour. The banks were no more friendly, frankly, in those days. With the bank's consent, or with the bank's agreement anyhow, Lady Bell lived for a number of years at Jimbour House after that. I've mentioned those matters at this stage because The Australian Dictionary of Biography states that the Bells then became virtual grace and favour tenants at Jimbour. That same publication states that Joshua Thomas, or Joey Bell, was dependent on his ministerial salary and his wife's income. It appears that in 1892, when Joey was 29 years of age, he and two of his brothers assigned to the Queensland National Bank their interest in their father's estate. In 1903, he had married the widow of that Joey Bell, of Sydney Jones, a Rockhampton solicitor. And the legal firm of Reesar and Sydney Jones is and has been a well-known and highly reputable firm of solicitors in Rockhampton for over a century. Joey used Jimbour as his headquarters and spent much time there, I suppose you'd say, when Parliament was not sitting. And both Sir Joshua Peter Bell and Joshua Thomas Bell were men of probity and of the highest integrity. Joey Bell was Speaker of the Legislative Assembly from June 1902 until his death in March 1911. Now,
That's not my fault.
Sounds over. Right. Joshua Peter was one of the founders and original shareholders of the Queensland National Bank. In 1881, that's the year of his death, he had merged his pastoral interests with those controlled by Sir Thomas McIlwraith and another. And they formed the Darling Downs and Western Queensland Land Company, of which company I've said Joey became a director on his return to Australia from England. But that merger appears to have marked the decline in the Bell fortunes. The Darling Downs and Western Land Company experienced financial difficulties, and the Queensland National Bank held the Bell lands and stock as security. And the Queensland National Bank was declared insolvent in May 1893, but however it was reconstructed that same year, and the chief creditor being the government. The Queensland government proceeded, in fact, against the directors of the bank and the executors or the trustees of the Bell estate for fraudulent misrepresentation in relation to their accounts, but a not guilty verdict was returned and the accused were all acquitted. Now, the bank entered into possession of Jimbour in 1884, but as I've already said, it allowed Lady Bell to occupy Jimbour House during her lifetime. She lived there for a few years, but eventually went to live in Brisbane and died in January 1914. In January 1912, Jimbour House and the, just under 6,000 acres of freehold surrounding this place, was sold by the bank the year after Joey Bell died. But owing to financial problems of the buyer, the property reverted to the bank and was subsequently sold by the bank in October 1922 to a Mr. Charles Whipple. Mr. Whipple did nothing to improve or restore the house, which was falling rapidly into disrepair. And in 1923, Wilfred Adams Russell of Dalwally, Roma, purchased the property from Whipple. Are you shaking or is it just light just moving? Wilfred, that's David's grandfather, of course, Wilfred Adams Russell. He and his wife did a tremendous job in restoring Jimbour House and the gardens. And with the death of Wilfred Russell in 1932, Jimbour passed to his family, and his pastoral business was carried on under the name of the Russell Pastoral Company, of which Charles Russell, his son, Alfred Russell and Adams Russell, and David's grandfather, David's father rather, was the managing partner. And since then, the Russell Pastoral Company has been the owner of Jimbour House and the 5,800 odd acres of freehold surrounding it. I met and became a friend of Charles Russell when he and I were flying instructors together in the RAAF during parts of 1942 and 1943 in Launceston, Tasmania, or just outside Launceston, Tasmania. Charles Russell and his widow, Hilary, of course, have been great lovers of Jimbour House and have put a great deal of time and effort into its restoration and upkeep. Charles was never loath to take on the government or government agencies on such things as imposts, not only on the man on the land, but others, but particularly men on the land, be pastoralists or agriculturalists. Now, the Russell Pastoral Company has had its fair share of success. In one leading case, Logan Downs versus the State of Queensland, report in 137 CLR, the High Court found, as a suit of Logan Downs, the Russell Company, that a tax levied by Queensland legislation on stock used for production was a duty of excise, and so the Queensland taxing statute was to that effect invalid. And we're fortunate to have here this evening, as one of the guests, Peter Conley, who led the case. He was then, of course, a very active Queen's Counsel, and he led the case for Logan Downs and persuaded the court to take the following view. Then their second son, David, of course, studied law at the University of Queensland. I recall Charles Russell coming to my chambers. I was the judge at the time, asking if I could give David a job as my associate. Unfortunately, at that time, I had committed myself to other persons in succession over a number of years for that job, and I did not imagine, of course, that at that time, this poor youth to whom Charles introduced me would be one day become my son-in-law. David graduated in Arts and Law at the University of Queensland, and also some years later he in fact received a master's degree in law from the university. Now, David married our daughter Deborah, who also has a law degree from the University of Queensland and has been admitted as a solicitor, but at present he does not practice as such. There were lawyers in the Russell family, although not directly concerned with Jimbour, and I'll refer just to a couple of them. David's grandfather Wilfred, our first cousin Charles Townsend Russell, who was a well-known Perth solicitor who died in 1911. That Charles Russell had a daughter, Enid Marjorie Russell, who became the first woman to qualify in law in Western Australia and the first woman to be admitted as a legal practitioner in that state. She was secretary to a delegation which went to England in 1934 and 35 to press for the secession. It's not that I've had too much wine to drink, my mouth's getting dry. And spent some time in England working, unluckily for secession. But after World War II, this woman Enid became for some years, a librarian and law lecturer at the University of Western Australia. And she was researching and writing a thesis for her master's degree in law, but regrettably died in 1958 at the age of 54 before it was completed. The research was edited and published by members of the Western Australian Bar in 1980 after her death. It's quite fascinating book, The History of the Law. It's entitled The History of the Law in Western Australia and its development from 1829 to 1979. Now, in conclusion, and I noticed some people who are standing up while this is going on, getting a bit impatient. One can see that law and the legal profession have been involved with Jimbour since the bankruptcy of its pioneer owner, Stugall, and through the years of the Bell family's ownership and thereafter up to the present time. And in final conclusion, and it's final, may I mention that a week ago today, that's last Saturday, David celebrated his 50th birthday and can now rightly claim to be of age.
Ladies and gentlemen, the formal part of the evening is almost over, but before we conclude, I need to say a few thank yous. First, to the people of Jimbour. The history of places such as this is usually told in terms of the contribution of those who own them. It is easy at times to overlook the fact that they are in reality the physical embodiment of the dreams and sheer hard work of a huge number of people, most of whom avoid the limelight and instead go quietly about their business. When you arrived this evening, you were handed a card which listed the names of those whose collective efforts have produced this evening's arrangements, from the design and construction of Jimbour to the present day. They include many whose contribution is, in a sense, to this evening alone. Even that is, nonetheless, a permanent contribution, for even now I hear the memories of those who attended my grandparents' reopening function and speak of the magic and wonder of that occasion. The outstanding skills we have seen on display this evening, whether they be Lynn Hill's Flowers, Barry Hempel's Aerobatics, the musical arrangements by Spiros Rantos, Frankie Tillers and the orchestra, or the lighting and sound coordinated by Murray Siddons and executed by, amongst others, Derek Campbell and Philip Kay, themselves are now part of the Jimbour story. Not only that, but by extending to new heights the opportunities which Jimbour presents, they provide an inspiration and a challenge to us. Carl Graham spoke a little earlier this evening about our latest venture, great and in due course wine production. Our project team is with us this evening. In addition to Michael von Berg and Ian McRae, it includes Peter Scudamore-Smith, who has been a leader of the Queensland wine industry in recent years. Peter advised in the selection of this evening's wines, all from Queensland. So until I'm in a position to urge you to buy our own product, I ask you to judge the product of our state's fledgling industry not on the sometimes dismissive comments of Southern critics, but on the evidence you've seen this evening. At a physical level, one of the consequences of Jimbour's history has been that building renovation has proceeded in the absence of the original plans. Indeed, until recently, without knowledge of the identity of the architect. We now have evidence that it was Richard Suter, but we also now have a full master plan for the future development of Jimbour as a result of our current architect, John Walsh. Those of you who have known this building over the years will appreciate the extent of the improvements for which his guidance has been invaluable. Critical to the maintenance of Jimbour for many years has been our master craftsman in residence, Gino Sandrin. Gino's painstaking attention to detail and wide range of skills are responsible for much of what you see about you. One of the most famous gardeners of all time took his nickname from his habit of observing landscapes and observing that particular places had capabilities. But it takes more than a capacity to identify opportunities and means to develop them to make a good gardener. Desmond Anderson at project development level and Bernard Koch as day-to-day superintendent of the Jimbour Garden have both these skills and the persistence and dedication necessary to maintain our existing garden and, as you will have seen, to extend the landscaping. I'm sure you will agree that the magnificent display the garden is giving this evening is fitting testimony to their efforts. The responsibility for day-to-day management of the house is carried by Gwen Armstrong. No matter what the problem, Gwen confronts it with an apparently unshakable serenity, reminding one rather of a majestic swan proceeding unruffled as it moves across the face of the water, but paddling furiously underneath to ensure the objective is reached. The newest member of the Jimbour team is tonight's chef, Anthony Palmer. As the evening progresses and you come to enjoy more of Anthony's creations, you will see why we are confident that in the years to come, Jimbour Food and Products will enjoy a reputation for excellence. Indeed, this evening, much of what you will eat comes from the property and, as far as possible, is locally sourced. It is not my intention to speak of members of the Russell family tonight, but an exception must be made in relation to my brother Alec, who lives here and cares for Jimbour on a daily basis, no matter what the task, be it helping Gino with building work, Des and Bernard in the garden, or in his formal role as company pilot. Alec's contribution is essential to all our operations here. Second, I must say thank you to our speakers this evening. Carl, since you have been manager at Jimbour, you have seen major changes and indeed have been the source of many. Under your leadership, we have restored the Charolais cattle stud, adopted more ecologically sustainable farming practices, and more recently played a major part in the new areas you have mentioned this evening. In addition, since my mother left Jimbour 3 years ago, the operational responsibilities of Jimbour have become more onerous. All of this you have done uncomplainingly and with a great deal of skill. My family owes you an enormous debt of gratitude. I hope that, in turn, the opportunity to lead the changes which are occurring here provides a fitting reward. Rob, it was my duty and pleasure to serve as president of your party while you were Premier of Queensland. Few had the opportunity to observe your service to the state as I did, or to appreciate the quite overwhelming difficulties which you had to confront during that time. It gave me enormous pride to see at the helm of Queensland's government one who was totally unconcerned to amass personal benefits for himself, but more importantly, and often sadly less recognised, one who had a fundamental understanding of the challenges which government of all parties face today. But the real mettle of a man is tested not in prosperity but in adversity. It would have been a very easy thing for you to do after the last state election to have simply looked for a career elsewhere. That you did not, but committed yourself to the redevelopment of Conservative politics in Queensland, having once previously led your party from opposition to government, speaks volumes for your commitment to public service. And it is difficult to imagine that your greatest days as leader of our state are not ahead. It would be superfluous for me to add to the material already available on the distinguished services rendered to Queensland's law and government by Sir Walter Campbell. So I shall confine myself to remembering his observations when speaking at Deborah's and my wedding. On that occasion, he said that we rarely agreed. Indeed, the only thing upon which he could recall that we agreed was the quality of the wine in his cellar. Sir Walter's cellar appears to have become somewhat smaller of late, or perhaps it is just that its contents are less regularly dispensed. That possibly explains my recent interest in growing some wine for myself. But in any event, there is at least one other matter on which we have always agreed, and that is the quite exceptional qualities of his daughter, Deborah. Indeed, I have discovered that it is really quite easy to organise a function such as this. One simply settles the guest list, departs for overseas, and if you have a wife with the meticulous attention to detail and genius for organisation, as well as the exquisite taste that Deborah has, you come back to an occasion like this. Thank you, darling, for everything. If there could be anything which could detract from this evening, it is the absence of the one other person whose labours over the years have made Jimbour what it is today. In the whole of the history of Jimbour, no one, not Lady Bell, not my grandparents, or even my father, who runs a close second at 45 years, exceeds my mother's period of residence here of 53 years. As many of you will know, recent years have been far less kind to Mother than her service to Jimbour, family and community warranted, and she did not feel well enough to make the journey to join us this evening. But she joins us in spirit and has asked me to read this message to you. My greetings to you all. I am indeed disappointed that ill health has prevented me from coming here to enjoy this party with you. I lived here for 53 years with my beloved husband Charles and 5 children until his untimely death in 1977 left me a widow. but life goes on, as we all know. So many friends, many of whom are here tonight, have helped me on my way. Life has always been busy, and we did our share of entertainment, but rarely on this scale. You have come from near and far, and doubtless there will be tales to tell thereafter. Maybe I will hear some of them in due course. Have a wonderful time, Hilary Russell. And the final thank you is to you all. By your presence, you honour us, and we are grateful for that. As you can see, Jimbour was built not as an island of privilege, apart from the community, but as part of it. And it is when it serves that role that it really comes alive. If it were not for that involvement, all that would be left is an empty, if impressive, building and less than enjoyable cleaning and maintenance expenses. You have given all my family an evening we shall not forget. And in return, all of us, Anna and Alec, Ian, Marilyn, Deborah and I, even you, Mr. Chairman, offer you the commitment my grandfather made here just over 75 years ago. Through this lonely world, alas, once and only once we pass. If a kindness ye can do for suffering humanity, do it, for it is very plain we'll not pass this way again. I have spoken of many people, but here there is only one star of the show, Jimbour itself. Jimbour has seen many owners, bad times and good, but through it all has lived the determination of those associated with it, first to establish, then to restore, and now to maintain the essential vision which has always been an inseparable part of it. And so I give you the toast to Jimbour, and in doing so, to the spirit of excellence which created it and has sustained it over the years. Ladies and gentlemen, Jimbour.
Jimbour.
Thank you.
Dinner is served. They really are public.